picture of this Christmas ball on Instagram and Facebook a few days ago, and my sister saw it and she asked if I would make one for her that's just like it. So I decided I would make a video to show all of you how to do this. And if you have small scraps of Christmassy fabric or any other kind of fabric that you like to use, that are pieces that are too small for actual big projects, this is a great way to use it up. So I'm going to show you all the things that you need, for the ingredients basically for it. And then we'll go step by step for how to do this. It's not hard. The only stitching that's involved is doing the serger chain if you want to use that. But if you want to use ready-made trim or ribbon, there's absolutely no sewing at all. So I hope you enjoyed the project. I hope you make one. And if you do, send me the photographs. And let's go over and take a look and get going at how we do this. Let's take a look at the supplies that we'll need to create this beautiful Christmas ball. First, you'll need a smooth foam ball. Mine is about 4 inches. I used 3 quilting weight cottons, solid red, solid dark green, and the holly print. You'll use the fabrics of your choice. 3/4 inch wide painter's tape is perfect for marking the lines on the ball for this particular design. And the painter's tape is good because it's low tack, easy to see, and easy to remove. I used just a ballpoint pen for marking the lines, and then to cut into them to create the crevices that will tuck the edges of the fabric into, I used an exacto knife. To trim around those edges after the fabric is tucked in, I created serger trim with 2 8-weight threads and serger cone thread. You can use either pre-purchased ribbon or trim of your choice. As a finishing embellishment, I like the little nail heads, adhesive crystals, tiny buttons, beads, or if you prefer not to use anything at all, that's your choice. I think that covers everything, so let's get started. Before I start constructing the ball, I want to run off a couple of yards of this serger chain to use as trim. And let me give you the setup for that. This will go around the edges of the bands on the ball. And I am using a rolled hem stitch. I have my rolled hem selector lever on the R, so I've disengaged the stitch finger. I have my stitch length on about 2.5 because these decorative threads are 8-weight in the upper and lower loopers, so they're kind of thick and heavy. So it sounds like a long stitch for a rolled hem, but for these threads, it is not. I have serger cone thread in my right overlock needle, and as I said, 8-weight thread in my upper looper, that's gold, and I have green 8-weight thread in my lower looper. Now, any heavier weight decorative threads will work very nicely if you don't have these particular ones. Just find ones that complement and look nice with your fabric selection on the ball. So I've run off just a little bit of this, and after I'm done, what I like to do is give it a press, because you can see it's not completely flat and smooth. It's pretty good, but by pressing it with steam, it really gives the stitches a nice, smooth, flat appearance. So after I'm done running off a couple of yards, I'll press it, and then we'll start constructing. We've got all of our equipment together. Now, some of these things we're not going to need right away, so I'm going to put them off to the side. We don't need our little metal embellishments or the serger chain. But in that previous photo, you could see a seam in the ball itself. It goes around, and I always say it's like the equator. So that's exactly the way I orient it. And I am using 3/4 inch painter's tape for my guidelines for the red strips to go around. And I find that the easiest way to mark them is using painter's tape to go around. So I put that around the equator. I kind of marked it halfway on it. Then I think about the North Pole and the South Pole, and I take the tape and go around it from north to south. And then I do one more from east to west. So that gives me my little sections, and it makes it a quick, easy way to get the ball segmented correctly for this. Then the next thing that I like to do is, we're not going to keep that tape on the ball. So what I like to do is just take a pen or, a Sharpie marker, whatever you have, and I draw my lines, because this tape is going to come off afterwards. And it doesn't matter that it's not erasable, because it's all going to be hidden underneath the fabric. So I'm going to draw my lines around each one, and I'm going to continue this process around all of the segments, and I will see you back here in just a few minutes. All of my guidelines are drawn, so now I'm just going to peel off the tape, and I can throw it away. I don't need it anymore. And let me get these. Painter's tape is great because it's a low tack tape, so it's pretty easy to get rid of it. And you can see we've got great guidelines here. So one more piece. And the only parts of the lines that we're missing are those little squares where we're going to do the contrasting solid fabric. And again, the color fabrics, or whether you use printer solids in different places, that's your call, and you're the artist. So all I'm going to do on here is just kind of freehand where my other little squares will go. And these don't have to be drawn perfectly. It's just like a quick little guideline for me. There's that equator again. You can see the little seam in the ball. So that's a good starting point for those lines. Okay, these are all drawn. Now, the next thing that we need to do with these lines is we've got to make little slices along them, and those are going to create the crevices that we will tuck the fabric edges into. So I've got an exacto knife, and whoops, I missed one here. Let me get that one. But if you don't have an exacto knife, if you have maybe an old knife from upstairs, I would never recommend using a rotary cutter, because you're using a round rotary cutter on a round ball. Whoops, one more even. And that could be quite dangerous. You can really give yourself a bad cut if it slipped. And as we know, rotary cutters are mighty sharp. So, okay, I think we've got them all done now. Yep, we do. So I'm just going to trim in and keep my hands away. I just want to keep it steady on my surface. And I'm going to cut in about, I don't know, probably about 1/4 of an inch, and just go along. And you can just take your time. It's better to be careful than have any little tragedies happen along the line. So I'm going to go along, and if you're not exactly on the line, really doesn't make a difference. I don't think so. It's all going to look beautiful. And when you get that trim on the edge, you'd be amazed at how that cleans up any little irregularities. So keep that in mind too, and don't go too crazy. I'm going to go around, cut through all of these about 1/4 of an inch, and we'll go on to the next step. A little safety tip that I give you, that I thought of as I was cutting these, is for whatever hand is bracing the ball as you cut, keep it in back of where you're cutting. Don't have it down here, because again, these blades are sharp. So just keep it out of the way, just the way you would if you're cutting fabric with a rotary cutter. You don't want your hand in front of the blade ever. I like to fill in the triangular segments first. So I've got 8 of those, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 4 on the other side. And I'm going to do the same motif for my friend, because this is the way she really liked it. And I'm going to use these little pieces that I've cut about 2.5 inches by about 3 inches long. And that's plenty for tucking in. And the orientation of the fabric doesn't matter at all. Just do it so that you can get the most out of the least amount of fabric, especially if you're kind of short on fabric. But you want to make sure that as you're orienting it to tuck in, that you've got plenty for basically sort of a seam allowance as you go along. So I'm going to start, and you're kind of, I think I'll use the dull side of the exacto knife and get this going. And just kind of tuck it into the crease as I go. And I can go back in and snug that up even a little more as I go along. But you can give it a nice firm press in just to make sure it's tucked in and stays put. And for the excess fabric, you'll cut that away after everything is tucked in. And if you have little threads or a teeny bit of raw edge peeking out, don't worry about it. We can get rid of that later on. I'd rather have too much fabric than not enough. So I'm down to here, and I'm going to come around on the next side. And you're kind of working blind a little bit, so you'll feel for where that creases that you cut into the styrofoam, and just work it along. And sometimes you find out that the way you've positioned the fabric, you might be a little bit short on one side, which I actually think I am a little bit. See, I see the line right here and this. So I'm going to pull this out and kind of reorient it. There's no, you don't have to worry about it not being perfect, because you can always pull it and start again if you're not oriented correctly. So no worries there. So let me get this going once again. And I kind of like to pull in more from the seam allowance side, the excess side. And that way, I think I'll have enough of the fabric as I go around it. So I'm just going to keep working along. And if you have something skinny too, that's kind of narrow, whatever you have around to use to poke in the fabric will work just fine. Let me just do a little bit. There we go. And now I'm ready to come around to the third side. And you can see what I mean right here by having a little bit of excess fabric. And I'll just take a pair of small scissors, and I actually have a lot on these other pieces. You just want to make sure you don't have any bubbles or excess fabric in the triangle itself. You want to make sure you've got a nice snug fit, which that looks really good. It's smooth, no excess fabric there at all. So now I can go back, and I might tuck just a little more snugly, just to make sure everything stays put. This is good. Okay, so I'm going to take my little Kai scissors, which I absolutely love for so many things, but this especially, and I'm just going to trim it as close to the edge of the ball as I can get. And as I say, I'll still see a little bit of fabric here and there, but I can go back in again, just continue to tuck that in. And even if a teeny tiny bit is still sticking out, when we put the serger braid on or other trim that you like to use, that will hide that. So I'll just go around, trim this up. And the order in which you do these, whether you do the triangles or the fabric strips or the little squares first, it really doesn't matter at all. It's your choice. And there are times too when I've done these where sometimes I've decided I don't like maybe the print fabric in the big part. I might want to switch it up and put it someplace else. And that's permissible. Now you can still see some of these long threads I'll get rid of. But now I can go back again with the dull side, the non-blade side of my Exacto knife. And still being super careful about where I have my hands, because you never know. And I can just tuck in these edges a little bit more. Just a quick tip on tucking in the fabric. Don't try to tuck in an excessive amount, only because you've got to tuck in another piece into that same crevice. So trim that fabric once it's tucked the first time, and you can go back and push in those longer or the little bits that are sticking out. But try to cut it fairly close, so that way you'll have enough room for that second piece to get in there without having to fiddle with it too much. So that's just a little tucking tip. Okay, 1/2 of the triangles are done. Let me just snip off this long thread that's sticking out. And now I'm going to go on to the other side and do the exact same thing with those 4 triangles. I have all 8 of the triangular sections done, and you can still see some tiny little tidbits of the fabric edges sticking out, and I'm not too worried about those. And the next thing that I will tackle are the red bands that go in between, and they're just little short sections, maybe about 2.5 inches long and narrow, about 3/4 of an inch wide, the same width as our painter's tape was. So I'm going to cut those bands just a little bit longer and a little bit wider than each of these sections, and I'll show you what it looks like, and you'll start to see the whole thing come together. It's really, I just love these. I think they're so pretty. So I'll see you back here, and as soon as we're ready to start tucking the bands. I decided, just as a little bit of insurance so that I don't run short on these, the length of each section from square to square is about 2 3/8. So I'll probably cut the length of these 2 3/4, and that'll give me plenty. And I cut it widthwise about 1.25 inches wide, which is well more than enough. So now I'll cut some lengths off. I just wanted to be sure I had enough length on these so that I didn't run short. Let's tuck in the first band, and it does not matter where you start at all. It's really your choice. There's no rhyme or reason to where you need to start or finish. Exactly the same technique, just tucking as I go along. And I like to get one short edge in, get it tucked in there, and then I'll do one long side. And sometimes the fabric has a tendency to kind of slide over as you're working, so keep an eye on the other side just to be sure you've got enough to tuck, which cutting it that width doesn't present any problem. And this is starting to look really nice. And again, you just want to make sure there's no puckers or excess fabric anywhere as you go along. And then the last side, I want to make sure I'm in the camera frame. There we go. Tuck it right in. And then I'll just trim off that excess, and I'll repeat the process and go around the rest of the ball. The first red band is done, and it looks a little raggedy on the edges, but again, that trim will cover up those edges, and if there are any longer threads that you can just snip off. But something that I wanted to mention that I have done by accident different times is when you're tucking in a second fabric into that same crevice, sometimes you can be a little bit too enthusiastic and really pushing hard, and it might pull fabric out from one of the other edges of the triangles. So just keep an eye on that as you're tucking the fabric in, and make sure that you haven't pulled it out anywhere else. I'm going to continue along with the rest of these bands and we'll take a look at it, and then all we'll have left are the little squares. I have all of the red bands tucked in and completed on the whole ball. You can see that, and again you'll see kind of raggedy edges that are kind of trimmed in close, but that won't matter. So now I'm ready to do my little green squares, and I've got my fabric right here. So these are 3/4 of an inch square, so I'll cut that fabric about an inch, and that will give me enough to work with. I just measured the little squares, and they're really more like 1.25 inches, so that gives me a little extra room to work with. So I will start tucking these in, and it might be a little bit tight because you've already got 2 fabrics tucked into some of these areas, but it'll work. And this part is pretty quick because it's so small. Just need to see where my little crease is there. All right. So it's the exact same process, but now you can really see the whole thing starting to take shape. So what I think I'm going to do, what I ended up doing with the red ones is, rather than cut them as I went along, I decided to tuck in all of the bands, and then I went back and trimmed up all of them. So I think I'm going to do the same thing with these green ones. It's a little bit more efficient. So I am going to tuck in all the rest of my squares, and there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, I think. So I'll tuck these in, and I will see you back here after I trim these up. Everything is all tucked in and ready for the serger chain trim, or whatever trim you're using. And I like to use gem tack. I've used it for attaching rhinestones to fabric, and it works with this trim against the fabric as well. It holds it nicely. And there are other adhesives, obviously, that you can use. So if you have a favorite one, that's fine too. And I like to use something kind of skinny as an applicator. And this is actually a tiny little crochet hook, but it's got a thin tip. Even a toothpick would probably work, or if you had something, just a very fine type of piece of metal or something that you could use as an applicator tip, that's fine too. So what I like to do is I like to kind of get the some of the glue into the cover of it. And what I like to do is just kind of carefully dab it along the seams. And I always like to start and stop my chain on an intersection, because that way I know it's going to be hidden with one of those little gold metal pieces at the end. So I like to do that. And so I'm going to start, and I just press it down pretty firmly. I'll start that edge right in there, and I press it right along that crease. And again, you can see how that kind of covers everything up. And I'm going to go right down the whole edge of the red band next. And I don't like to overdo the glue. So let me just ever so gently dab it along. And I kind of, if you kind of get it into that crevice, that way it won't come leaking out on the sides either. So let's, and you can see how nicely that covers up all of those little edges that kind of give it an unfinished look. So I'm going to work my way around. Just do a little bit more for you to see. I haven't cut that serger chain at all. I don't want to run short on it as I go around. So I'm going to just kind of dab that on and just keep working it around. And when I get to the starting point again. I'll see you there in just a few minutes. I didn't mention why I have a piece of paper under here, but I do like to protect my surfaces, and I'm working on a fabric surface, so I don't want to get glue or anything else on that, so I'll keep that paper underneath this while I'm working with the adhesive. I'm right back to the beginning edge again, so what I like to do is just carefully trim it just so that they butt each other. I don't want to overlap them because it will make it bulky. So I'm just going to butt that right up there and give it a nice little finger press with maybe a little bit more adhesive to hold down the little tails of that. So there's my first one all done, and you can see how nice it looks. So I'm going to continue around the same way, and when I cross over, I'll do the exact same thing, and I'll see you back when all of these chains are trimmed onto the ball. As you're working along, sometimes your little applicator tip can get kind of thick and globbed up with the glue. So it's a good idea to periodically just stop and kind of wipe it off so that it doesn't get so thick that you have glue leaking out from the edges. The next step is to attach these little gold nail heads right at the intersections of the serger chain. I have gold and silver, and I think gold will work because I have gold trim and it goes well with this. So I'm going to use my gem tack again. These are adhesive already, but I honestly don't think they're sticky enough to stay put. So, and I'll show you what I'm gonna do with that little jingle bell next. So I'm just going to attach these, just press them down right at the intersections of all of the four corners. And I'm gonna pull the paper in too because again, I'm using the adhesive and I don't want it on my surface. This is basically the same technique. I'm just taking little dots and putting them on the intersections. Probably just do two at a time. I just want to, and you want to kind of be delicate with it so you don't glob the glue around. So let me take my first couple of gold ones, get those on. And I like to give them a nice firm finger press, get them all centered right on there so they're covering up the intersections. Give them a nice firm finger press. Don't have glue on your hands or your hands will stick and pull it right back off again. I've done that lots of times. Here's the second one. Then I like to kind of press down on them for a few seconds just to make sure that they're firmly set. And now I'm just going to continue around to all the other intersections, do the exact same thing. And our final step will be to attach the hanger. And I'll show you how I do that. I showed you this little jingle bell before because this is something I think I bought at a dollar store a few years ago. They were on a string. I had a whole bunch of them. And when I was looking for a way to attach the cording on this first ball that I made, I was looking through all of my things to see what I had that would hide the attachment point on the ball itself. And I saw these jingle bells and I just took the cap off and I used that. So what I'm going to do is, with the rest of my serger chain, you can decide how long you want it. It doesn't matter. I think I'll make this fairly long though, because I'm not sure where this will be hung in our friend's house, and she may want enough chain. And if she doesn't want it quite that long, she can always lift this off, undo the cord, because we're just going to put a knot in it, and shorten it up. So what I'm going to do is just put a knot in this, just like this, and I am going to pin it to the ball. Before you put the cord on to hang the ball, you have to decide where you want the motif to be most prominent for the front of the ball. if you wanted it on one of the green squares so that you have the cross kind of symmetrical and right in the middle, that's fine. What I decided to do on mine was I put it right in the center of one of the triangles. And then when this hangs, it hangs more or less with the square on point. So I think you can see that. There we go. So, and I kind of like that. So I think I'll do that again on this. So I'm going to put the chain right here. And what I'll do is I've tied a knot in it and I cut off those little tails and I pulled that knot pretty tight so they have it. And I'm just going to take some good old plain pins. There's nothing fancy about this, believe me. And I am going to put this in. I'll put a few in. And you'll see how I hide this whole thing because it's not all that pretty. Like this. So then what I'm going to do is take my serger chain and just slip it right through the top of this little holder. It really worked out just perfectly for it. And hopefully I can push it through. I probably need a little pair of tweezers, or the tip of my scissors will pull it through too. Just like that. And I'll pull this top right down and bring it down. And I might, I had thought about possibly gluing that, and then I realized that if I tie another knot right on top of it, the way I did with this one, it holds it in place very nicely. So I think that's what I'll do. And our ball is basically done, and it's really fun. I hope you enjoyed seeing it, and I hope you make some too, because they're really fun to do, and they're a great way to use up your scraps of fabric. And I'm just looking at this, and I think my my top is a little bit off center, so I may pull it out and move it over a scooch to the left. But I hope you enjoyed it, and if you have any questions or anything, be sure to send them along. Thanks for joining me today. I hope you had a good time with this, and if you have any questions about the process or any of the different pieces that I use, please send me an email. I'll be happy to hear from you. And keep your eye out. You never know, I may make one more different ball this year. Thanks, and happy holidays to all of you.